Welcome back to Titanium Hanger. This is Mike. I'm coming at you with another video. This time I'm asking a question. Should Masterpiece combiners use parts forming? Is it acceptable? Is it okay? This is a discussion that I've been hearing a lot. I see it in my comment section all the time. The debate back and forth whether or not parts forming should be allowed or is acceptable. And I'm going to let you know what side of the fence I'm on this. I'm going to show you where we came from, where we are and where we're going when it comes to combiners, when it comes to parts forming, and where the debate began and why it's still going on today. But before we get into all this, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and there's many more great videos coming with excellent content. And then also, please press the like button, because if you like the video, even if you don't like the video, whatever, it helps me decide and gauge whether or not this kind of video is the type of video that people want to watch. So, moving into this, back in the day, we had G1 combiners. The original OG combiner, the first combiner, was Devastator. So Devastator had a very heavy parts forming influence. If you could look, you see that the waist was apart, the head was apart, the connected pieces, the pelvis plugged in to cover up some ugly. It is probably the epitome of parts forming. It's a G1 toy. And so with that, you see that they actually re-engineered all the other ones to have less parts forming. So when you get into, say, a G1 Superion, now all the other ones came with a center bot and limbs, but it still had parts forming. You had to plug a head on, you had to add fists and feet, and then chest pieces usually. But they got away from the whole center section needing a ton of pieces to just combine. Now, you lose some aesthetic if you lost those pieces, but it will still combine and stand on your shelf to this day. So, I say fast forward a bit to the beginning of, say, Masterpiece era of combiners. Now, TFC was one of the early on companies to make combiners, and I have to say that I don't think there was a TFC combiner they made that I truly liked. Maybe the Bruticus, but still, they tried hard to get away from parts forming. They started with integrating the head, the second head, in the chest of the Superion in their Uranus. They hid the head in Uranus so that you didn't have to parts form that. But this figure does look like it had its head in Uranus. And then you still had to add on the feet and the hands, and but that was a bit of the problem there. Truly integrating 100% was even hard with them, and they sacrificed some aesthetic a bit. They weren't slave to G1 look, and so with that, they still struggled. And of course, what came of it was probably not the most solid figure. And you know what, we kind of accepted that because, hey, it's a combiner and they're trying to go a different route and not have as many parts forming pieces. You have the likes of Unique Toys, and Unique Toys, they stick to the same formula of not having as many, and you really can't get away with the hands and the feet. And then of course, like, I'm not 100% sure how they pull the chest piece off. I haven't owned this or touched this, but I do know that you can tell by looking at it that he doesn't have a parts forming torso or waist or anything like that. So that was not wasted on this figure. Next, we get into Combiner Wars. Now, yeah, this isn't Masterpiece, but I'm going to tell you, if you think it's just Hasbro made these toys for some kids, they didn't. The Devastator was definitely meant to be sized big enough to fit in with Masterpiece scale. And I have to tell you, one of the things I forgot to say about the other ones was that the early combiners were not Masterpiece scaled, Masterpiece sized. The early third-party combiners were Chug scaled and Chug sized. And for me, I felt they weren't big enough. I didn't even feel like they were big enough for Chug, but once this Devastator came out, I felt this guy was big enough. And they got away from parts forming with this Devastator, but then another problem arose. in order for them to get away from the parts forming, it created one figure out of the set that looks so horrendous that it would never stand on its own as an actual character. This is a byproduct of not having parts forming. Yes, of course they still had the hands and feet part. Well, they didn't have feet. I mean, that was all integrated, but the hands part. So yeah, there was still some parts forming, very little parts forming with that Devi and the chest piece and all that. But this figure is a disgrace. Just looking at it standing, so you could never display this team on its own merit. Not to mention that the knees are no longer knees. It's just it looks like he's got a broken thigh instead of an actual knee joint. But you know, give and take, right? Now, just for engineering standpoint, looking at the Combiner Wars figures, the five part combiners, they actually didn't use a whole lot of parts forming pieces aside from the foot, hand, mouth diseases that they had. So the foot and the hand were actually the exact same piece, just one folded all the way open and the other one folded halfway, which I thought was interesting, but I really felt like they should have put a little more engineering into that. But they also could plug in robot and alt mode, and so they were integrated in a way. The guns actually clipped into the sides of Superion, so there were some good things, and this actually included the head, so they had their head included in this figure. So with that, I think they were going the right direction. And if you look at this, of course, Takara had their hand in this, and of course Takara had the Unite Warriors they released, and so how much of the engineering this was on Takara's behalf. Now, fast forward, and I'd like to say modern day, but it feels like Constructor's been around forever now. But modern day combining, and you can look and see the difference between the Devastators, and you're going to see, without a doubt, that Constructor wins. Now, does Constructor win just because he looks more G1? That's a tough decision, because the actual Combiner Wars, the Unite Warriors Devastator, does look pretty G1. Like, he stands out. You know what that is. You know who he is. Devastator was originally intended to have more of an Ocular Max design. Not truly a G1 design 100%, but it's looks pretty good. I have to admit, I liked it. I picked it up. I've got it on my shelf. I didn't get the first one. I got like the second one that had the G1 stuff, not all that other weird parts. But he uses heavy parts forming. His waist is heavy in parts forming. Of course, his hands are parts forming and all that stuff. But he's not... I don't think it's anything wrong with it. I wouldn't want to sacrifice any character like they did with the Combiner Wars one for the parts forming. And I don't mind having this torso or waist piece to clip on. I don't mind the fact that it looks absolutely amazing on my shelf. And I haven't seen anybody else figure out a way to engineer this to make it work without this part. And I think that this is the key to making Constructor look so good. And without a doubt, everybody seems to have a Constructor in their set, in their collection. So we're talking about Toy World. We're actually talking about Zeta. And with Zeta, they've taken on a whole new aspect of combining. When they went to the 5 robots, instead of going less parts forming like we've seen in history, they went more parts forming with an entire torso. And I'm okay with it. And the reason I'm okay with it, because they look so good. They are solid. When I pick Superion up, well, the little jets on the arm sometimes come apart. But when I pick him up, move him around, whatever, I set him down, I don't worry about him falling over. Every one of those early ones that didn't use parts forming pieces, I have them standing fine, and for whatever reason, some of them just fall over like that. I've got this Venusaur from Fans Project, and that thing just out of nowhere just fell over on its own. And I thought I had it all stable and looking good, and just plop. And there's a whole lot of other ones that have that same stability issue. Because I blame the lack of parts forming. I blame the lack of, maybe there was a way they could have done it and made them more solid. But the reality of it is, now people are complaining that, yeah, all these combiners are just, the main bot folds into a torso. Well, we're getting Fans Toys ones. Now, we don't actually know exactly how they're going to combine. And we don't know there's a whole lot of mystery about all the future combiners coming out. I don't understand how we can't have like a diagram how they're going to combine in with every figure. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's almost like we're buying into this piece at a time, and then the big mystery at the end, how do they go together? It makes no sense. But so looking at that, it's starting to look like all the companies are following suit with Zeta. And, you know, even when it looks like we've got some Minosaurs, and they're just going to use the trailer. So DX9 and X Transbots appear to both utilize the trailer as an exoskeleton. And in fact, once it's all combined together, there's... well, DX9 not so much, but with X Transbots, it's looking like you could almost just take their Motor Master, turn a trailer into the exoskeleton, plug Motor Master in, and then have yourself the whole character, and then you just plug, you know, the two figures on the back, and then you integrate the arms in somehow. They're supposed to like split apart or something, which then again is still a mystery. But trying to figure all that out, of course, is a challenge, and we still don't know. And we still don't know actually with Fans Toys either on their Venusaur. But that's all parts forming. And guess what? I'm not upset about it if it gets me a stable, good-looking figure. So anyway, where do you stand on this debate? I want to know what you think. How many of you refuse to buy a figure that requires parts forming? How many of you are going to wait for a possible hold your breath that some company is going to come out and integrate everything, including the hands and the feet? Wait, it's already been done. You can go out and get yourself a GoBots Puzzler. That thing integrated feet, hands, head, and everything into its design. So there you go. But anyway, like and subscribe. Titanium Hanger out.